here. And so welcome everyone. My name is Cynthia Ambries, and I am here today with my son, Michael. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, hello, mother.
And as many of you know, I am a New Thought minister, a spiritual counselor, an energy medicine healer, and we are launching this initiatory interview to discuss spiritual awakenings. And I wanted to interview my son, Michael, so that he could share with us what his experience has been. As spiritual awakening is something that is currently unfolding here on our planet, I think at a more rapid pace than we have seen before, because of the place that we find ourselves in collectively as a species. It just is time for us to awaken. And so Michael is a musician, and he is very much a spiritual enthusiast. He's also a father of two daughters. And being that he is the generation after mine, I wanted to get his perspective on all of this. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And so why don't you share with people a little bit about your background pre this spiritual experience?
Mm-hmm. A very introspective being. It seems like since a very young age, I've always been kind of a fly on the wall, very, very much observing the world around me and taking things in. And, being around you and kind of seeing where you started, and you had a similar path. You experienced a lot of these things as a child, as most of us do. We come in here very aware and in touch with that side of ourselves until we come across the things that are going to kind of set the table for what are we going to be working through for the rest of our lives. You had your experiences with I think it was Virgin Mary.
Yes.
As a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had personal experience of those. We can touch on those eventually. But then as you go through life and you start to become immersed in the fire, I'm very well aware of the survival mode that you went into as a child, and then I experienced that, and it's generational. I'm not sure that anybody can ever avoid that. So, coming into this before the awakening, I've just always kind of been in this position of balancing things out and observing the things around me and thinking a lot before I move. We grew up in Watts, at least I did for the most part. I know you came up in a couple of different places, and that's a good place to start. Adversity to build the character that kind of turned me into who I am now. And so angel cards, growing up in the Catholic church, going to Catholic school for 13 years, K to 12, and being exposed to that, and then in high school being exposed to world religions. That was actually pretty surprising for a Catholic school. That was interesting. Getting into youth ministry, teaching a little bit of catechism, and coming to a crossroads where it just wasn't for me. The constructs of what that religion was, and deciding to embark on my own path, and having been exposed to something with that kind of foundation, but also seeing the path you were taking when you started to seek it out again, when you were looking for the answer for your neuropathy. Mm-hmm. Sedona was an experience. And as I'm looking back at photos now, I'm like, I was well on my way in my teens. I met my friend Austin from high school, and his mother's very much like you. She was very spiritual. She was a guide at that point. We used to go to the Bodhi tree, and, from like 15 to 18, 19, I was, doing my tea and my meditation, doing all the things I saw around me, not really having a full grasp, but definitely thirsting for that experience. And then growing up and being exposed to the things that kind of put you back to sleep, relationships and trials to relationships and coping, toxic coping, substance, alcohol, and very little drugs. Didn't do many drugs, but a lot of alcohol. And then probably fully let go consciously of that spiritual journey that I had started around 15 to 18, right around the death of Mama, or my grandmother. Drinking heavy, putting on a ton of weight, and literally like the weight, and then the weight that came with that stuff. But having gone through all of those things, with this awakening, having the retrospect that it's like it never left me. I'm like, I feel like the universe was breadcrumbing me everything along the way. Looking back, how certain situations took place, and recognizing some patterns, and seeing some of the same things in a lot of the characters, new characters, same, but same character development within those things until you started to wake up. And I feel like I started this coming back around my probably around my 32nd birthday. And that was like at the peak of a lot of the stuff that was going on, like where it started to kind of hit a crescendo. And then like coming down the roller coaster of kind of starting to let go of some of that stuff, starting to change little habits here and there, let go of the dependency on the substances, kind of stop numbing myself and allow myself to feel things. And then I thought it was very interesting as I was approaching like my 33rd birthday, started becoming very handsy, like Jesus and the carpenter. I just started doing all these things, started immersing myself back in that. And then I felt like this really restarted again back in September of this year. But as I look back on the entire year and probably about the last 3 years, I'm like, I've slowly been coming back to it and then fully becoming aware of this right around the middle to the end of September of this last year. And it was like pretty transformative and like undeniable, like special, like waking up to like the wonders of the universe again, this existence that we're in. Like, holy shit, this is awesome. And then like having the contrast of what life was and then what life is in the same moment, like the perspective shift. It was probably around May of this last year. I was getting ready to put out a music project, and I walked up to my front door, and there was this moth on my front door in the night of like, it was like a Sunday evening. I had just dropped off Tasha at home, and right away, moth, M-O-T-H, Mr. Over Their Heads. I'm like, I can use that for my music. So it was like this moth revealed itself to me, and I used that photo to create some artwork. And so there was that around May, and then in September, right outside of my studio door, a chrysalis had formed on the gate. And so right when I discovered that chrysalis, like that night, like I started to feel pressure on my third eye, started to experience some of these ascension symptoms. And even when I went to bed, I felt like something had come across like the auric field, like in cocoon me. I felt almost like a cold, fiery feeling kind of come over me as I was laying there. And it was a hell of a time trying to go to sleep that night. But it was like after that night, things were never the same. And that night was the first time I had proven to myself that I was not dependent on alcohol to create. I came into the studio that night and I wrote something, and it was like super profound, like some of my best work I had done in years. And I was like, I did it once, and I said, let's make sure this isn't an accident. And so I carried out for the rest of the week, creating without that dependency on substance. I'm like, look at that, I hadn't freed myself. So I mean, I'll stop it there so you can ask more specific questions on what you're looking for. But there were some things that took place, and that's why I like the duality behind me of like the dark and the light, the moth and the butterfly. Like I started to really identify with that, like during this awakening process.
The symbology of it all. And I think that's the perfect metaphor for so many of us that go through the awakening process. I know I likened my journey through practitioner studies at Agape as us stepping into the cocoon while we were held lovingly by the teachers and the people at Agape, and then coming out of that cocoon, with our wings. So I love that somehow this all played into your awakening as well.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So you mentioned ascension symptoms. We'll come back to that. Describe some of those for people that might be going through their own awakening.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell us, keep going, actually. What was the spiritual awakening like for you?
It was like realizing I had gone, so inadvertently I'd gone into this fast. I had done some heavy drinking like on a Sunday night in the middle of September, and I woke up and I felt like shit. And like I'd been experiencing these kind of feelings since like June, like in the summer. So I started to cut back on alcohol. And then I just felt like shit. I woke up like that Monday morning and like I looked myself in the mirror and it just like couldn't stand what I was looking at. Like it almost didn't feel like it was me. And I had been thinking about attempting a fast, like maybe a day or two or something like that. And then as I got through the process of that first day, um, typically like when you're fasting, if you can get past that first or second day, then your body shifts into that state of ketosis and then you have all the fuel you need. This is why a lot of spiritual practitioners actually are really good at fasting and why they tend to open themselves up to what is to be received. And I can't say consciously remembering like the ear ringing taking place prior to that, but I became conscious of it. And like ever since then, like my right ear is always ringing and it's not tinnitus. And it's just like not constantly, it turns on, it turns off. And it's been my cue, like, okay, let me still myself, let me ground, let me look around my surroundings and see what's trying to come through. And then I had done some research on what it meant, the difference between the right and the left. I had been hearing that a lot of people experience it in their left ear, and they said when you experience it in your right ear, typically it's a sign of like a very all of a sudden ascension and awakening. Like it wasn't a long process, like it happened like that. And that's what it felt like for me. Um, and it kind of started this process of all this conscious shadow work that I was going to be embarking on. And you had started sharing some content with me about people that were going through awakenings and these processes taking anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 years for some of these awakenings. And I felt like I was ascending at a very rapid rate. I was going through, a dark night of the soul and a dark morning of the soul and a dark afternoon of the soul, like different things throughout the day. And, going my entire life, never cursing God for anything I'd ever been through. And, you know, depending on your perspective, you could have definitely justified somebody, burying their fangs at God and cursing at God, and never been that way. And then as I was going through some of these and going through the work, and I finally had reached like a breaking point of like, hey, this is a lot even for me. Like what's going on here? But what was happening and how fast it was happening and the realizations that I was having about myself and clearing out the blockages and working through all that, where a lot of people might fear that, I was hooked. I'm like, there's a ton of this and I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing this. And eventually there'll be a slowing of the pace. But for right now, while I have this energy to do it, let's get through it. So working through all that, generational trauma, the things that had been passed down, the experiences that you and I shared with, a lot of the same characters that we both experienced coming up. I'm not going to expose anybody. But
No names will be mentioned.
no names. We know who we speak but clearing that stuff out. And I had already in my sleeper years started to do some of this work, letting go of it. But like I fully bought into the purpose of forgiveness and it being more for me than anyone else. And if it ever made it back around to these people energetically and it did something for them, God bless them. But for me, all of this relief, it became addicting. Like it started to feel, it's like the first time that you stop smoking cigarettes and you stop drinking and you stop taking a drug and you get out of a shitty relationship, all of these burdens being released. And it's like, why wouldn't I want to pursue this for the rest of my life? And I was like, I'm back. That was like a moment of I'm back. And what do you say? Return to wholeness, return to self.
Yes, right. That's the other title, the other half of the title to my book.
Yeah.
A return to wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Because really that is the truth of us, right? We're never not whole, but because of the personality that we create over the years to survive,
Mm-hmm.
We start living from the personality as opposed to the truth of who we've always been.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like we're meeting ourselves for the first time.
Yeah.
And to me, it sounds like you were on a treasure hunt. And as you were excavating all of the dirt that had accumulated, piled on top, you start discovering the gifts of yourself,
Yeah.
of being you. So it sounds like you did fasting without knowing what it was going to lead to necessarily. Like it
Yeah.
was.
It
Right.
wasn't even intentional. Like it just, I happened to go an entire day without an appetite, and I'm like, I'm starting to feel better. Let's try this another day. And I pushed it an entire week, and I probably could have kept going, but it was a good cutout point. And I've actually done a few fasts since then, and I've incorporated it into my monthly regimen. Try to fast maybe, if not once a week, I try to fast, once a month for an extended period.
It, I'm glad that you brought it to my attention, because fasting was not like a regular part of my um, spiritual practice or everyday life.
Yeah.
But since you went through your spiritual awakening, and you were fasting, and you actually invited me to join you on one of them, and seeing that I could go 2 days without eating was a big surprise to me.
Yeah.
So I'm continuing to explore it, to do it as long as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like I said, as I was being breadcrumbed back into this, a lot of my content consumption had changed. And one of the things, I replaced all television. I gave up listening to the radio in like 2014 or 2015. And then I stopped watching television. So I started curating my content. If I sat down to watch something, I was on YouTube and I was fishing for what I was looking for. And one of the main focuses for like the last 3 years had been like your biology and nutrition.
Mhm.
And I discovered some stuff, and like you start to dive into it, and you have the people that are geeked out by the science, but then you start to see the correlation between the biomechanics of that and how that works with like monks and people that are spiritual practitioners. And it's like there's a method to this madness here.
Mhm. I mean, yeah, and people like Yeshua, the Christ, right?
Hmm.
Fasting was a normal part of his life,
Yeah.
as it was for the community that he was brought up in, the Essenes.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just funny to me that it's like, okay, I could take on forgiveness, right? Because he was the example for us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that he had done that I was willing to take on, but fasting was one I had resistance to. So you're diving in. I remember you started going hiking to a mountain. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think I had completed that week of fasting on a Sunday or a Saturday. And then that next Monday, I just randomly picked out a local hiking trail that was about 2 miles from the house. And I had been called to like start the process of, no matter how small, I need to start the process of documenting some of this, because it is going to lead into one, how I take care of myself and my family, but also two, me stepping into, that teaching role eventually for some kind of guardianship, or just whatever it is that I already have the vision for it, but we'll get to that eventually. But I had to start the process. No matter how small, I had to start somewhere. So I had to start vlogging, and I would go on this hike, and it probably take me about 25 minutes to get up to the top. And I went up there without any concepts or topics, but then this is where like the universe, like I started picking up on the synchronicities and the downloads that would come through. And so I get out of my truck and get on the trail with nothing to talk about. And by the time I got to the top of the mountain, I had my fully formed thing for anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes of content. Um, and then it was interesting how it laid itself out. To me, it has some kind of sense to the order of, I did 2 weeks worth of topics. I think I did Monday to Friday, 2 weeks in a row before I took a break and started being more um, selective with what I was going to do. But it just presented itself to me. And that was like that abundance, like that universal abundance. If you open yourself up to it, and you raise your vibration, and it comes to you. And it presented itself as like I said, I've always been on this journey, whether I was awake about it or not. There was an artist that stuck with me, had said something back like in 2006 maybe, and he went in and he did this freestyle, and he said, I feel like God wrote it and gave me the credit. And a lot of the times when I sit down to create, like that's how I feel. Like I talk about things that I haven't studied in depth, but I have like this wealth of knowledge, and somehow just had this connection to it, and I could speak about things confidently. And I'm like, that's what it feels like. I feel like God wrote it and gave me the credit. But like that was like my connection to source. Um, and so it wasn't just music, it started to become these topics. And what was pretty humbling is I thought of myself as an intellectual in my sleeper years. I didn't feel like a dumb person. But when I became conscious of this journey again, I felt like I was starting from square one all over again, even though I had immersed myself in it in my teens. Uh, you know, it was weird how even the algorithm had changed in TikTok, where it used to be nothing but like food and battle rap and music stuff in my algorithm. And one day leading up to the ascension, maybe 3 weeks before, tarot started popping up. And I'm like, And I'm like, I have no interest in tarot. I'm like, why is this on here? And then it persisted and it kept coming up. And then eventually, as I started to tune in, things would resonate from collective readings. And I'm like, okay. And my antennas started to go up slowly, more and more and more, and started picking up more. And then, after about 3 weeks of that, I was like fully awake. Stuff. It's like, hey, I'm here. You have my attention. Let's see what we're supposed to be doing here.
So there was an actual letting go of your old life,
Yeah.
right? And then it sounds that the next part was a deep dive into healing, facing, being present with the emotions that you had been carrying from the experiences, some traumatic,
Yeah.
very traumatic, but not resisting any of it. And it almost sounds like it organically presented itself to you as far as this is what you're going to be addressing today.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
Absolutely.
And then from the mountaintop, I remember you addressed the mother wound was
Yeah.
right.
You had you and I had done that energy work session the day before or 2 days before. And that discussion that we had leading up to the actual session, I had presented you with what I had been thinking about, and then you were the one that presented it to me the next morning after you had some time to reflect. And I was like, I had never connected the dots between this and that.
So tell us a little bit about that. What was the mother wound like for people that may not know?
There were abandonment issues that had presented themselves. I was raised, mostly by my grandparents in the early years, while you and dad were kind of finding yourselves and figuring things out. And there wasn't, for me personally, there wasn't a feeling of, oh, I was well taken care of. But then those kind of tendencies and patterns started to manifest themselves in other relationships throughout life, and that'd be familial, that'd be friends, and then it eventually turned into like relationships. I kept attracting these women that it was like just the flash in the pan, like it burned hot and heavy really fast, and then like people would disappear without any real reason that I could come up with for myself. And then you don't know the terminology for a lot of these things until you go looking for the information. Avoidant attachment, avoidance and runners and anxious attachment styles. And it's interesting because I've always been interested in psychology. And I feel like I gravitated towards studying psychology because I've always been very intuitive. I've always been able to read the energy in the room, the body language. I can, pick up on someone's very empathic, always been very empathic. So this is like the stuff that you came into the world very connected as a young person. And then people around you that are insecure that you're picking up on all these things, they almost like they put on this mask and they try to make you feel like you're the one that's crazy. So I went like on this path of searching to make sure I wasn't. And then I discovered like, no, I've been right this whole time.
Is that what people now call gaslighting?
Yeah, that's a new term. I had never heard of it before, but yeah, that's gaslighting.
Yeah, I think I discovered that term just a few years ago, but I was like, gosh, I've been experiencing that forever. It's just called something different.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not even sure that I'm positive it's not necessary that it has a label to understand what it is. And even if it didn't have a label, you can recognize it's happening. You can start to identify the pattern. But I mean, if it needs a label and it helps people identify it easier, so be it. But I'm like, I always knew what it was without needing a name for it.
So you had the awakening process, you rolled up your sleeves, you're sometimes on the floor, I imagine, crying like so many of us, right?
Yeah, not quite, because I felt like that had always been a part of my maintenance, even in the sleeper years. Like I've always been very comfortable letting out a cry, even though I kind of went into a bypass mode for like the last 10 years where I probably did a lot less of it, but I would still do it. Um, but like I've never been some kind of like toxic masculine that wasn't, oh, I can't cry because you can't go. I've always been I needed it. Like I can't move forward unless I clear this shit out. I don't go to bed angry. I can't do that.
That's wonderful. Um, you called me and said that you were having these awarenesses around the divine feminine.
Yeah.
How would you describe that to somebody that's completely new to the concept of feminine and masculine energy?
And so here's another term. These are terms that, I mean, you've always heard about alpha males and beta males. Um, that's always been around. And then like one of the newer ones that arose was sigmas. And then like there's a correlation between sigmas and then like spiritual masculines. Um, and I don't identify, I'm not a beta, like I'm not some pushover, I'm not some weak person. And it's like it's a part of my duality that like I have the alpha abilities without the desire for the spotlight or the leadership. It's like I'm someone that can step into leadership if it's necessary. Like I'll save the day. um but I've always had this balance between my feminine and masculine energy, and I think it came out of necessity that identifying that if I were to give in to the masculine side of things, I'd be very destructive, and I don't know that I'd still be here or that a lot of people would still be here, because if I operated out of my masculine, there'd be a lot of retribution. So uh by like necessity of, even as a part of a survival, which is a bit of a toxic trait that you pick up, it was necessary for me to sit in this feminine energy, always considering things, always being the one to hold back, be the bigger person. um and so, but then that's probably why I've been able to manifest my creative abilities and my alchemy and my transmutation without ever knowing those terms either. I had always been fascinated by alchemy and like magicians, but I had been unfamiliar with the term transmutation until the awakening. And I'm like, I've been doing this my whole life.
Isn't that interesting how once you start to look back, it's like at this point you're doing things very intentionally, very from a place of awareness and consciousness.
Yeah.
But to see how the ability has been there and you were doing this to a degree.
Hmm.
Um, but for some of those that don't know, all of us have the divine feminine and the divine masculine within us, right?
Hmm.
Feminine energy does not pertain only to women.
Hmm.
And so the goal is to bring them both into balance within ourselves, because the feminine energy is the creative, the patience, and the wisdom. And then our masculine side is the assertion of the action, right?
Hmm.
And we can have all these wonderful creative ideas, but if we're not able to follow through with action, then nothing happens. And the beauty of it all happens when we're balanced in both, knowing when to be still, right? And
Yeah.
then being able to move when we get the guidance that it's time to execute. Um, but you have exhibited the patience that not very many people have had, right? So
Yeah.
many people um, approach life from, if I don't do it, it won't get done,
Hmm.
kind of thing. And so nobody really knows how to be. It has been a generation of do.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about your generation, that um, you guys are pointing out the fact that there must be more to life.
Hmm.
Right?
See, but and even that is the scales coming out of balance too, because there's going to be an overindulgence of that approach, and there's going to be a need to, well, you got to do something. It's that constant balance of inspired action and stillness, like when you're in the state of co-creation and manifesting here. I'm like, you can't just, oh, I'm gonna wish it into existence. Like it's great to come up with your plan and your vision and clear out all those blockages and align yourself with that, but then you got to do something about it too.
Yes, I agree. So that balance, right? Bringing
Mhm.
those two energies into balance.
Yeah.
So you shared a little bit about your process. Who who are you now on this side of this particular awakening experience?
Hmm. Um, you know, I'm very much still a lot of the core values. Like that had been instilled in me from a young age. In choosing self, which is something I had never really done before, choosing self just to have that as the foundation, I still choose to be a person of servitude. I still, in choosing myself and my happiness, I find my happiness in finding a way to give back and to, only be 2 steps ahead and pass something along to whoever else is along the way in this journey or any aspect of life. And I'm very much a person that is learning to detach from outcome. And I've always kind of been that way as a fisherman. Like being a fisherman has tied me into like where my patience was developed, going from I needed to catch fish to have a good trip to I'm just happy to be out here in nature, regardless of the outcome. And that was like where this last trip I took on my birthday was like the perfect example of trusting the process of the detachment of outcome. I had one of my best trips ever. I went with no expectations, and I came home with like over 200 pounds of fish. Like it was one of the best experiences of my life, like to this day. And so when I need to remind myself of that for current situations, like I just think back to what that was like. Um, so I'm just this person that's also sitting in the middle now, where I feel like my place in the spiritual community doesn't look like any other person's on either side of the spectrum. I'm not someone that's immersed completely in the darkness, and I'm not ever going to be a 100% love and light being. I'm very much finding my balance in the yin and yang, and I had never really made the ties from yin and yang to me being very Cancerian. It's that balance of light and dark. And then when I think back to all the things I've been attracted to, there's always been this duality. And then I've always been drawn to like the Hermetic teachings without knowing what the Hermetic teachings were, of the duality, the polarity, the rhythm, and all these things. And it's like I'm finding my place in the world as like almost like this mile marker on a highway, letting someone know there is no complete picture of a person before you're done and leaving here. Because even when you leave here, you're not complete. But there's like, get rid of like the blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus. Like that's not what we're here to be. It's not what this is. And I'm here to be this example of stepping into the darkness and coming out into the light to play, and stepping into the darkness and coming back out into the light to play. So this gas and break in this infinite loop in the universe of doing this until I'm out of here, at least from this plane. So I'm just finding my place of like being this balance keeper, almost like a Libra kind of, but somehow there's this balance and duality in this Cancer too. And it's cool, like the crab, he lives underneath, as above so below. Like they walk on land and they live under the water. And I thought that was pretty cool. They're out during the day and they're out during the night. So I'm starting to find all of these synchronicities of that duality and polarity in this life.
I like that because often people think that a spiritual individual has to look or be a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And one of I think the most powerful lessons I received about a year and a half ago was learning how to embrace being divinely human and what that means.
Yeah.
And how that entails or involves all of the emotions, right? From joy to ugly cry to
Yeah.
to rage even, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not having a resistance to any aspect of what it means to be having a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the way that you were describing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and embracing the darkness and the light.
Yeah.
And I also love you made a statement about the joy without attachment to outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I always have this visual the second that somebody says yes to spirit, to God, because God is creativity, ceaseless creativity and
Mm-hmm.
motion.
Yeah.
And when we say yes to allow it to create something through us,
Mm-hmm.
I have this visual of a person that does somersaults behind us because it's like, yes, they
Yeah.
said yes.
Yeah. Right.
Right? Regardless of what the outcome may be, it is a success in the mere fact that we make ourselves available and we allow this creative energy, the source of all of life, to do something through you and me.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you so much for your yes, for inspiring me to do things I haven't done before. And knowing that it is success in and of itself, successful in and of itself, regardless of any outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. I've come to terms that at any given moment where any kind of doubt starts to creep in or something that feels more low vibrational, like I remind myself, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. And, and then the more duality of like being fully content with who you are, loving yourself, who you as you are now, and still being able to envision more of what you want to experience in this life. And then I almost feel like I'm coming to a point where it's like, because the universe is abundant and infinitely abundant, you'll be able to create all of this for yourself to the max of whatever you want. And you'll get to have the human experience, because on this journey, a lot of people will get lost in just being a spiritual being and the spiritual experiences. And it's like, you can have this full 3D experience to the max, to the point where you've experienced it all. And then you can just be content within yourself with your eyes closed and nothing around you and nothing else attached to, like completely detached. Like, I feel like that's going to be like the summation by the time I'm done here. It's like I'll experience everything here fully in bliss, and then come to the point where I don't need anything to experience that. Almost like in that movie Limitless, where he takes that drug, I think it was NZT, that basically turned him into a super connection highway to source. And then eventually he inherently genetically absorbed that ability without needing to put that substance in his body.
Uh-huh. It's amazing, the freedom. What I'm hearing underneath, like the words that you're saying right now, is the liberation of simply allowing yourself to be and experience it all without attachment.
Yeah.
And isn't that what we want? Um, I don't know that everybody realizes it, but it feels like a quality that all of us probably wish to experience.
Yeah.
Um, can I create, can I be, without regard to people's opinions or anything outside of me?
Yeah.
Wow, 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 wow.
I think one of the first books that I like picked for myself on this journey as like a teenager in high school was Freedom from the Known by Krishnamurti.
Uh,
And like, I probably didn't have a full understanding of it back then, but I don't even have to read the book again to remember the excerpts and the things that I read. And I'm like, oh, that's what you meant.
that in and of itself is kind of cool, as you're awakening to different degrees.
Mm-hmm.
um, to realize that okay, that's what that meant, or that's what that meant, or
Yeah.
this is what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, where there's no limit to our awakening and
Mm-hmm.
embodiment, right? um so like you said, it's like being content with who we are,
Mm-hmm.
um but also being open to continuing to access more and more
Yeah.
of ourselves. So let's say somebody that is fairly new to this realm of
Mm-hmm.
reality, um, and they're just starting to awaken and see beyond perhaps the matrix,
Mm-hmm.
and they're feeling unsettled and questioning, like, am I losing my mind?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say somebody came to you, how would you assist them? What would you say to them?
You know, I guess not everyone's going to have this luxury, but I mean, there's always some form, some kind of substitute. I'm out here in a very heavily populated area, but still like nature is still all around us. And just stepping outside, just, I kind of reconnected with always being in marvel of like nature, like something away from concrete, like green and the colors and the animals and the sounds that all the animals make and the wind blowing through the trees. And like just being in what this all was before, we came and colonized everything. I'm like the natural state of nature. I'm like, that helped me to reconnect with this stuff and get in touch with something that if you ever become disillusioned with, what this is, what this experience is, you can tap right into, what this all really is, just like stepping into what is naturally here, what was here long before us and long after us, So like just grounding in nature. And I hate getting my feet dirty, to be honest with you. I don't like sand or dirt or nothing like that, but just putting my feet in the grass and feeling all those different things and relying on that kind of sensory stimulation. And there's something that I've been saying subconsciously, not even realizing why I was saying it, but if I ever had to choose between being blind and being deaf, I'd rather be blind, and still like be able to hear the things around me, especially with music. And then you realize the language of the universe is frequency. But like just to be able to close my eyes and imagine everything that experience everything. I almost feel like that's like what the Big Bang must have been like when you expanded into consciousness, is like just blindly feeling everything around you, like relying on every single sense and not just what you see. And then that's the biggest problem, light, is conquering the mind and the ego, because it's what you see with your eyes. So I'm like, I've been relying heavily on that to like guide me through any sort of spiritual psychosis, or being disillusioned, or even jaded with life, like when things are like a little too much to bear.
And I could see that because, so yeah, going out into nature is very grounding. And
Hmm.
at the same time, I feel like it could be very elevating, because how can you not marvel at the beauty of nature? And or even, to me, it's a reminder of this divine intelligence that
Yeah.
creates it all.
Yeah.
So it feels like it could be grounding and elevating simultaneously,
Yeah, I
or
agree.
expanding.
Duality.
Yes. Um, what else might be? Is there a book that you would recommend to somebody that is, or books, or teachers?
you know and there's been duality in the influences I've had, throughout my life, like teacher 1A and 1B for like my younger years. A lot of comedians, like, they're very tapped into source. And it was like my spiritual guide, like my light being was like Wayne Dyer, and then like my shadow worker was like George Carlin, for a big part of my early years. And then later into my like late 20s, early 30s, then I discovered like Sadhguru and Jordan Peterson. um I think it's very important to have a control of the mind that's here until you immerse yourself in that tethering between 3 and 5D existence. So like psychology is very important to study the mind, and a lot of these psychologists were atheists. And then even someone like him, in the middle of me finding him at the top of his prominence and apex, then he started to dissect the Bible, and then he admitted to something greater than himself and started like acknowledging God, and whatever else, like whatever your beliefs are. But like he went from a non-believer to actually like there has to be something behind all of this.
Mhm.
So like I feel like it's very important to find Alan Watts, another person that was guiding me through a lot of this, and then Jordan Peterson subscribed heavily to Carl Jung. So like a lot of the typical guys that are revered in psychology, and then Wayne Dyer and Neil Donald Walsh. You showed me both of those people early on, and then I discovered Krishnamurti for myself. And I mean, there's a ton of people that have sat with themselves and been still, and then come up with some books about their experiences, just experiencing themselves. Anybody that can be comfortable enough to sit with themselves should have something to be able to teach somebody.
I agree. I think that in and of itself is an indication of where we are as a society, right?
Hmm.
Um, there we're so concerned with keeping ourselves busy because there is discomfort in simply being still.
Yeah.
So if you're experiencing avoidance of self,
Hmm.
that's a good indicator, right? That there is some work to be done.
Yeah. And I think for me, that manifested itself in always staying busy and working 12 to 16 hours a day. And then, in whatever hours I spent at home, drinking until I went to sleep. Like there was an avoidance of self. And then even in my meditation now, I can't sit still. I go into a meditative state in doing certain activities,
Mhm.
but that's just my form of meditate. And I'm in a constant state of meditation. I meditate while I drive, and then I realize, how the hell did I get to where I got? How did I end up here?
Well, I want to say that some of the teachers I've encountered, and I believe even Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a great teacher of meditation,
Hmm.
that the goal is to to make your life a walking meditation,
Yeah.
right? To be able to carry that level of awareness that you may have for a fraction of a second when you're sitting down in meditation,
Yeah.
and for that to permeate throughout your day.
Hmm.
That is exactly what it is that we want to be able to do, because I'm like you. I find it hard to sit still for too long.
Hmm.
um but I get a lot of insights as I'm moving through my day,
Hmm.
if I move slow enough.
Yeah.
Mhm. So just reassuring people that are beginning to wake up, right, to more,
Hmm.
beyond our physical senses, our
Hmm.
five senses,
Yeah.
reassuring them that that is exactly what is meant to be occurring for them,
Hmm.
that they are at the right place at the right time. There isn't something wrong,
Hmm.
right? And that they can trust and surrender into it. And you recommended some teachers. Is there, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, or is there a way for them to do that through your social media?
Yeah, I currently mainly operate out of my artist page. And that would be v.absolucci. That's v.absoluxxi. On Instagram. That's one of the main ways to reach me. If you can find me there, I've got a link tree, I've got websites and other attachments for contact.
Because there's nothing more important, I believe, and I think as you have discovered, than to be around like-minded people, even as you're figuring out who it is that you are becoming.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's a verse in the Bible that talks about praying and going into the closet to pray.
Hmm.
So I think that would be one of the things that I would recommend to people as you're having these kinds of awakenings. Sometimes um, we want to share it with the world because we're like, oh my God, everybody needs to know about this. But because we are in such a sensitive state, right? It hasn't yet all integrated,
Hmm.
whatever is unfolding. You don't want to share it with somebody that's just going to dismiss you or your
Yeah.
experiences.
Hmm.
So you want to share it with people that are able to hold it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
So,
and I feel, personally, like, one, also emphasize that this is your experience. Don't take responsibility inherently to force this on anyone else. It'll happen organically. You will gravitate and attract in the people that are meant to get it from you. Um, but also that's where your opportunity is for strengthening your discernment. Is like realizing like who's ready for this, who's open to it, who needs this, and it's not my monkey, not my circus.
um, well, thank you very much. As a mother, as I've been on the spiritual path probably since like 1993 or so, with some veering off and coming back and veering off and coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you reached out to me and said, I'm going through an awakening,
Mm-hmm.
it was scary and exhilarating for me simultaneously, because
Yeah.
I know, right? It's like the world as we know it ceases to exist.
Yeah.
Uh, who we thought we were shifts completely. Everything changes. But there is a way for us to remain very grounded. Uh, at some point throughout this process, we are
Yeah.
okay. We are more than okay on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm honored that you chose me to be your mother, that I get to walk this journey with you. And I'm just very, very proud of you.
Oh, I'm very privileged to have had you kind of, blazing the path ahead of me. And then I'll take this as far as I can go before I hand the batons off to my children.
Mhm.
But I'm like, I don't have, now I do. I'm building my community now, but I didn't have a community that I could talk to about this stuff. So you were one of the only people I could talk to about this when it was happening.
Mhm.
But I'm starting to find my community now, and it's awesome.
That's beautiful. Community really is very important. Reverend Michael Beckwith, has the visioning process, right? And
Mhm,
the visioning process focuses on 8 structures,
mhm,
like financial, body, temple, spiritual study, beliefs, ego, community is one of them, relationships, and there's another one that I can't think of right now. But when I first got exposed in 2012 to these structures that you can vision for,
mhm.
to me, it seemed like community wasn't that important. And I've realized that it does make an incredible difference so that you don't feel like you're here on this planet by yourself.
Yeah, and there's only so much healing we can do on our own.
So I'm glad that you're finding your own flock.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll continue this conversation, I am sure.
Mhm.
Thank you for being a part of the initial launch of
Okey-dokey.
these interviews, and I'll talk to you soon.
Toodaloo.
Doo-doo-doo.